Is this the super money saver Mini to save us from the cost of living crisis? Suzuki seems to think so, and so did you when we did our fuel saving tips video. Plus, this new Swift comes with a claimed 64 miles per gallon fuel economy. So, is this the new king of the super mini world? For context, this car goes up against the Dacia Sandero, the MG3 and the Renault Clio, but it does so with a very different engine under the bonnet because it's by far the least hybridized. Where those other cars have big hybrid systems, this thing has a very mild hybrid setup, so much so that it doesn't get an electric motor to assist the petrol engine. Instead, it just uses the starter to help you get going. So we're going to find out how that feels on the road in just a moment. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. Suzuki calls this all new, but well, it looks a lot like the old one, doesn't it? Because this is definitely a case of evolution rather than revolution. And thankfully, that's also true for the price of the car as well, because while it's seen a slight increase, and yes, it's more expensive than those rivals, it is cheaper than a key one, which is the Vauxhall Corsa, and that isn't even a hybrid. Although, if you want maximum punch for your pounds when it comes to a Swift, well, you need to download our app or visit cinch.co.uk, because we've got them for way under 10 grand on there. Compared to the old Swift, this new one is slightly heavier, but thanks to the hybrid tech, it does get that very impressive 8% improvement in fuel economy, and crucially, it still has a 99 grams per kilometre CO2 output, which is going to be good for tax and also for fleet buyers as well. The whole car overall, though, is exactly the same size, and I mean to the millimetre. So if you thought the old one had a boot that was too small, you're not going to be impressed by this one. But actually, given the scale of the car, I think it's very impressive because it swallows our family-sized suitcase with ease, and UK buyers, because we don't get a spare wheel, we just get this useless bit of polystyrene. You also get a bit of underfloor storage as well. So I think this is a generous sized boot for the class. But what about the rear seats? Now, the first thing you notice when you climb in the back is just how good the access is. And that's because this door line is very squared off, which means you don't have to duck under a swoopy roofline to climb in. And if you want even easier access, well, Suzuki does offer a Swift All-4, which gets all-wheel drive, but it also rides 25mm higher. But you do have to pay £1,250 for the premium. So if you're going to go for this base Swift, it's good to know the access is nice and easy. And it's also nice to see that despite being a really small car, this has a good amount of rear space. I mean, knee room isn't massive, but I've got a good amount of foot room. Plus, it's true across the whole back bench that your head doesn't get anywhere near to the roof above because it's got a nice flat roof. You don't get any creature comforts, of course, but you do get electric windows, and you've got 3 cup holders, one in each door pocket and one down the middle there. So if you're carrying teenagers or kids in the back, this is okay. And if you're carrying babies, well, the ISOFIX bar is in very easy reach. So it's a good back seat, but let's check out what the front's like. Now jump into the driver's seat and you're greeted with a steering wheel that features proper buttons. And that's quite refreshing because it means controlling media and also your driver assistance stuff, which we'll talk about when we drive the car in a moment. It's very easy to do all of that stuff. Plus, if you look through the wheel, you've got 2 analog dials. That's pretty old school, but it's also exactly what you need. It's so easy to read. And then in the middle, you've got a small screen, but again, it's got loads of information. It's very easy to read, and I just like it. Then I'm going to turn my attention to this infotainment screen, which is the biggest change up front in this new car. And it uses a software that I have to say isn't the most reactive. It takes a few seconds, as you can see here, to cycle through the menus. It's quite frustrating, actually. But thankfully, it does get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard across all trim models. So for most of us, you're just going to emulate your phone on that screen. Now, I have to say, having manual controls for climate control is also very, very good. It's not quite the best system ever because it doesn't have knobs to twist. You've got to lift this up and down to control your settings, but it's just so easy to use on the go. And I'm also surprised by the amount of charger ports we have up here. Down there, I've got a USB-A, then I've got a USB-C, then I've got another USB-A, and then I've got a 12-volt port here. So you could put, I guess, more charger ports in there if you wanted to. And the storage space is small, but actually very useful. You've got a space down here to rest your phone. You've got 2 cup holders here. You've also got the one in the back, which you're probably gonna have to fight the rear passengers for. Plus, both door pockets can easily swallow a refillable water bottle. Oh yeah, and in this top grade model, I have to say, it's nice having the extra creature comfort of heated seats. Plus, the fit and finish, while the plastics are pretty scratchy everywhere, it feels tough and well made, and I like the 2-tone finish on the dash up here. Anyway, that's enough of the static stuff. Now it's time to drive the thing and see if that very impressive fuel economy figure is accurate. Now, let's start off by talking about things that matter most to Swift drivers, or Swifties as I like to call them. They probably want a car that is nice and compact on the road and easy to place, and this, having not grown at all since the previous model, remains equally as easy to do that. No matter the setting, actually, it feels tiny even on British roads, and the visibility is good. You sit quite high in your chair, door mirrors are quite tall, and I can see over the bonnet and very easily out the back. And that's also true when I'm reversing, because despite the fact that this car's reversing camera is pretty low resolution by 2024 standards, it does at least have a really wide view so you can see round to the sides as well as quite far back. It makes parking an absolute doddle. I also quite like, dare I say it, that this car has a proper manual handbrake. It feels very old school, but it does mean that when you're parked on a hill, for example, you know the handbrake is going to hold, so it's nice and tactile. And you're also going to want a nice tactile gearbox, and this car, while it only has 5 speeds, which does feel positively old school in today's world, well, it's a nice gearbox to use. It's light and easy to shift, and actually the shift action itself is really positive. Same goes with the clutch. It's a nice springy action. It feels actually quite enjoyable to change gear. What feels really different from the old car is to do with the mild hybrid setup. Not only does it give you a nice smooth delivery away from a standing start, so it makes it easier, for example, to not actually stall the car because you've got a nice helpful shove of electric, but it also means that I can be in a higher gear and put my foot down and get an initial shove of electric energy. Even though this petrol engine, it doesn't have a turbocharger, so by modern standards, it's pretty low power, but it doesn't feel underpowered as a whole package. In fact, it's quite punchy and it's quite nippy as well. And on the motorway, okay, fast lane life is a bit of a workout, but it will do it. And you can leave the car with its automatic cruise control to just settle at motorway speeds. And it will still get you really, really good, like over 60 miles per gallon fuel economy. Proper little 3-cylinder growl to go with that nice, smooth delivery. Now, the Citroen C3 is one of this car's main rivals, and we drove it recently, so check out our channel to find our review of that. Because that car really prioritizes comfort above all else. In fact, it does it very well indeed. And so jumping into this, well, firstly, it feels very different as a proposition because this is a lower car and it feels more like a hatchback versus the crossover vibe you have with that C3. But also, and quite significantly, this feels quite a bit firmer. It's a bit more fidgety over bumps. It definitely highlights drain covers and cracks and ridges more than that C3 would. Plus, well, Suzuki's made the suspension a little bit sportier because they wanted to give that enjoyable, maybe Fiesta-like fun from behind the wheel. And while it does handle well and it does corner nice and flat, that has come at the cost of comfort. It's fine over speed bumps and the bigger undulations, but the annoying stuff we get plenty of in the UK, especially after a cold winter. Well, this thing definitely does a job of finding every single bit of it. Might be a bit tiring. Definitely handles well though. It corners so flat for a petrol car. I mean, this feels EV-like in the way that it doesn't move around. It's really good fun when you fire in the right corner. So who's going to like the way this drives then? Well, probably just people who like a slightly old school feeling from behind the wheel, because while this has that mild hybrid, it's very mild. And because it has a 5-speed gearbox, because the steering is light, and because the car is small, it's really giving me vibes of like a car from 2014 or 2015. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Plenty of people find a lot to complain about when it comes to late generation cars, stuff that's coming out 2020 onwards. And this, well, you could say it's the antidote. One thing I do like though is the quirky Japaneseness of it all. Firstly, the steering wheel rim is nice and thin, so it feels more agile than it actually is, even though the car corners well. Plus, you've got these dinky little pedals, which mean even if you've got small or big feet, it doesn't matter your shoe size, it's just really easy to use the pedals and actually enjoy them as well. So all things considered, if you're coming from an older Suzuki Swift, you are going to love most of the changes they've made to this new one, maybe barring the slightly firmer ride. But if you're coming from any other car, well, I think if you're looking at the super mini class, I have to say the Renault Clio is my preference. And you can find out why in this review here.